It began with whispers, low and dangerous, carried on the wind like smoke before a fire. But soon enough, Isengard roared. Even now my memory burns yet hot with the deeds of that dark time. For peace gave way to the fires of war, and all became subject to the iron fist of the Uruk. Come, friends, and let me tell you of the armies of Saruman the White, and how he turned from wisdom to ruin, raising a host of savages to inflict great terror and turmoil, such as Middle-earth had not seen since the Elder Days. I am Cerfindol, of the House of Elrond, a warden of the northern marches, and witness to the long twilight of the Third Age. Many are the shadows I have seen crawl across the lands, but none came so swiftly nor so treacherously as the might of Isengard. Once, the Tower of Orthanc stood as a proud sentinel of the West, a gift to the stewards of Gondor, its black stone unmarred by time. But in the days of our waning, it became the lair of betrayal. Saruman the White, once head of the White Council, once friend to Elrond and Mithrandir, turned his gaze inward, down into the earth and the fires below. Greed for power consumed him, and he fell to the whisperings of the enemy. Though he claimed no allegiance to Sauron, his heart was snared by the same lust, dominion. From beneath the ringed walls of Isengard, he bred an army of nightmare. Not merely orcs, no, for Saruman twisted flesh and soul to craft a new breed, the Uruk-hai. Taller than orcs and stronger than most men, the Uruk-hai were bred in black pits beneath Isengard. They bore armor of overlapping black plates, forged with uncanny speed in the forges beneath the tower. Their helms were rounded, often marked with the White Hand, Saruman's blasphemous emblem, painted in crude strokes. Their weapons were brutal, short, straight swords and long pikes with barbed heads. They carried no grace, but their strikes were deadly and tireless. Unlike the common orc, the Uruk-hai did not fear the sun. They marched by day and by night, and they did not tire. I have fought them. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and there was no soul behind them, only will, directed by Saruman's cunning. The Uruk-hai were not raised. They were bred in dark pits beneath Isengard. The very earth seemed to birth them, as though Saruman had carved wombs into the stone itself. I have heard it said, by scouts of Rohan, and by Mithrandir himself, that their creation combined foul sorcery and twisted craft. Whether elf, man, or orc was the root of that flesh, I cannot say. But they were born full-grown, armored and armed near from birth. Their life was a cycle of utility. Rest was rare. Comfort, non-existent. Each Uruk was designed for function, to march, to kill, to endure. Training began almost the moment they drew breath. Drill masters, larger Uruks and captains, would set them to sparring with blunt weapons or cruel iron rods. Failure was punished swiftly, often fatally. I have seen dead Uruks stacked in piles like kindling, slain not by enemies, but by their own kin or masters for faltering in drills. They practiced in tight formations, learning to advance as phalanx-like units. Their shields interlocked, their pikes leveled in unison. This was no rabble of howling goblins. These were shock troops, trained in discipline and group tactics. They were taught siegecraft, how to set ladders, carry and protect siege engines, and burn barriers with pitch. Some learned to operate crude explosives, deadly devices built in the smoke-choked forges under Orthanc. Their sustenance was as brutal as their training. They ate foul rations of dried meat, perhaps orc flesh, perhaps worse, and drank a black liquid I saw once, thick and bitter, yet it seemed to fuel their endurance. They did not cook, nor sit, nor sing. They were always ready. And sleep? The Uruk-hai slept in heaps, like animals, when they slept at all. But even in rest, their hands gripped sword hilts, forever ready for the next kill. Though the Uruk-hai were his pride, Saruman didn't scorn the use of lesser orcs. Many came from the Misty Mountains, smaller, meaner, and with jagged blades and rusted armor. They were often used as scouts, laborers, and fodder, especially at Helm's Deep, where they were driven before the main host, flinging ladders and siege hooks against the walls of the defenders. Most of all, they feared sunlight, and many bore torches and shields to cover their eyes. Their armor was often patchwork, scraps of iron and leather, and they fought with a cruel hunger, both desperate and savage. These common orcs Saruman employed were not of his own making, as far as we know. These were creatures long bred in darkness from the depths of the Misty Mountains, smaller, squabbling and treacherous, yet useful in numbers and cunning when they wanted to be. Their daily life was chaotic, for unlike the Uruk-hai, they lacked discipline and worked from fear and hatred, not loyalty or order. Their training, if it could be called that, was violent and irregular. Young orcs learned by being thrown into skirmishes or by watching others fight. The weak died early. The strong survived to fight again. They favored ambush tactics, ranged attacks, and overwhelming force, and few ever learned finesse like the free peoples. In Isengard, Saruman tried to impose order upon all that gathered before him. Whips cracked often, and Uruk overseers beat them into formations. But still, orcs were unreliable. They bickered constantly, and more than once, they murdered each other for scraps of food or favor. Their shelters were tunnels and hovels built into the slopes around the Isen, and they ate anything: flesh, fungus, carrion, and cooked it seldom. I myself had often spied them at work from a distance. Their days were spent in labor, cutting trees, hauling stone, digging trenches for the wars of their own making. Saruman drove them like oxen, caring little for those that proved the instruments of his wrath. And when not working or fighting, they squatted in their filth, sharpening blades or muttering dark curses. I once passed over a camp of orcs in the night, and I tell you now the stench was as foul as you could imagine, and lingered for many miles around. It truly was a terrifying thing to cross a company of orcs on the road, and I pray you'll never have to, for your own sake. Moving on, it is important to remember that not all of Saruman's host were born of darkness. In a strategic move, he had sowed hatred among the Dunlendings, men of the hills who bore ancient grudges against the people of Rohan. With false promises of land and vengeance, Saruman roused them to war. These men fought with crude axes and wore leather armor and furs. They were not trained soldiers, but they came in droves, driven by passion and revenge. Many died before ever reaching the walls of Helm's Deep. Whilst some turned back, others fought with blind fury. Such was their fanaticism that they died in the same dark service as the foulest of orcs and uruks. For Saruman had exploited their pain, sending emissaries with gifts, promises of revenge, and tales of Rohirric cruelty. These men answered the call, not out of duty to Saruman, but out of vengeance for the Horse Lords. In terms of their military structure and arms, there was no real strict uniform or cohesion. Most brought their own weapons, and Saruman armed others with forged blades, though never as finely as his prized Uruks. The training of these Dunlendings was likely minimal. They fought as raiders and skirmishers, for Saruman's lieutenants gave them only basic instruction: how to follow formations, when to charge, how not to die in front of a pike line. But their true weapon and purpose was to cause as much chaos as could be wrought in the lands of Rohan. When not in battle, they camped on the plains in crude tents or in the open under the stars. They cooked their food, drank heavily, and sang grim songs of blood and lost kin. At night, they howled around the fires, stoking their rage before battle and calling upon their ancestors for renewed strength and power. To their credit, they were brave. At Helm's Deep, they climbed the ladders and charged the breach, and many died on the spears of the Rohirrim defenders. But few fled, and those captured spoke of lost sons, burned villages, and vows sworn before sacred stones in the hills, vows not forgotten lightly. More terrible still were the engines of war that Saruman devised. He brought explosives, dark powder and fire to the ancient walls of the Rohirrim. At Helm's Deep, a single blast brought down a section of the deeping wall. Such fire was unknown to elves or men, for it was unnatural, a mockery of all's gifts. The host of the enemy was truly a sight to behold. Ladders, siege hooks, great battering rams. His armies came prepared not merely for battle, but for conquest. Even the savage wargs were part of his force, ridden by orcs bent on sowing seeds of fear into all that opposed them. They were used predominantly to scout ahead of the main force, leading forays into the lands of Rohan and harassing smaller and weaker stragglers that proved easy game for a warg's appetite. With Isengard at full strength, many were the lands that fell into the palm of that dreaded White Hand. But Saruman was no brute. He wielded his armies like a heavy but well-balanced sword, using deception by burning villages, cutting off escape routes, felling trees to build siege engines, and poisoning the minds of kings. When he sent his army against Rohan, he believed he had won. 10,000 marched on the Hornburg, thinking the walls would crumble like clay. But he had not reckoned with the courage of men or the wrath of nature. For it was at Helm's Deep that the tide turned. Though the deeping wall fell, the defenders held until dawn. Then came the riders of Rohan, led by Eomer, and with them Gandalf the White. Yes, risen from the abyss that Saruman had long embraced. And behind the fleeing Uruk-hai came vengeance incarnate. The Huorns, the shepherds of trees, awakened by Saruman's ruinous greed. They fell upon the retreating army and left none alive. And then came the final stroke. The Ents, mighty beings of bark and bough, marched upon Isengard itself. Treebeard, oldest of the Ents, led them in a fury that I had thought no longer lived in this world. The river Isen was diverted, the fires were drowned, and Orthanc was ringed in flood and wrath. Saruman was trapped in the tower he once ruled, powerless, bitter, and all alone. So now you know, friend. The White Hand of Isengard was not simply a mark on a helm or a banner. It was a hand grasping at the throat of the world. Had he succeeded, the War of the Ring would have been lost before it truly began. But Isengard fell. But let us not forget the savagery of their forces. From snarling orcs and great Uruks, to the vengeful vows of the Dunlendings and the belching fire and smoke wrought from his wicked siege weapons. So remember this, friends, on the road ahead, lest you ever think that evil only comes in black cloaks and fire. For it may wear a white robe, speak with a soft voice, and promise vows of peace. But if its hand clenches tight, it will strangle all that lives.